Okay, so welcome everybody. Hopefully people are streaming in from the waiting area. We're going to get going with this talk from three of the amigos, let's call them, from MSKPN. My name's Jack. I'm going to moderate this panel, and hopefully we'll get some good discussions all about lessons learned from going it alone in private practice. So just one little thing I want to point everybody to before we get started. There is a little banner at the bottom of the webinar, which you'll be able to see, and that will take you to the MSKPN webpage for a bit more information. And MSKPN, I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit, but they are a really good resource for those who want to be in business in healthcare and also grow their clinics. You can join the network, immediately gain access to loads of business knowledge, WhatsApp group, and those kind of things. And they've been able to react really fast to changing landscapes and help people out. So do click on the banner and find out more information from there. So I'm delighted to be joined by Ed Doe, Rupert Crowfoot and Karen Young. Unfortunately, Karen's got slight bandwidth issues, so she's not on camera, but she is here on microphone. The way this is going to run is each speaker is going to do a little bit of a 5 minutes talking about their experiences and their advice, and then we'll have a chat between the four of us, followed by some questions at the end. So we're going to start off with you, Ed, if that's okay with you. Your 5 minutes starts now, and then I'll come back and introduce Karen in a second.
Bro, thanks, Jim. Good morning, everybody, and yeah, pleasure to be here today. I'm Ed Doe. I'm the director and a physio within Physio Space, which is a clinic based in Cardiff in Wales. We're a relatively young organisation. We launched in 2017, and we've been steadily growing since then. Primarily, we're a physiotherapy clinic, but we also integrate within our physio service Pilates, yoga, strength and conditioning, and sports massage. We've also got another arm to our business, which is the first contact physio within NHS GP clinics within Cardiff. So yeah, as I say, we're a growing clinic. Hopefully today I can share some of my experiences of the transition that I made from working in an NHS setting through to opening and running a private practice. So I'm going to rattle through 5 different points, in fact, today. The first point is in that transition period. So wherever you may be working currently, and if you're considering that transition to working in private practice, it's incredibly important that you're going to give some time and thought to how you can diversify risk in that transition period. So using my example here to give you a bit of an idea how that worked for me, when I was working full-time in the NHS, I started by just working in the evenings and working on weekends, building up a private practice list. So really put those kind of hard yards in at the very start. I then went part-time in the NHS, and then I went part-time in Physio Space, and I was able to kind of, yeah, just finally balance that transition between the two, so that all of the risk factors that I had to consider, you know, financially, I was stable, as stable as I could be at that period of time, and then I was able to build up gradually to where I then made it full-time in Physio Space, and now we've got a growing team that are providing that service across a wider geographical area. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to really prioritize building strong relationships with whoever your mentors may be. Again, going back to my example, a particular mentor that stood out in my scenario was somebody called Andrew Walton, who some of you may know. He is the group exec of Connect Health, and he's also the previous chairman of the MSKPN, of which we as Physio Space are a member. The relationship I had with Andrew was fantastic, because he provided kind of me with almost like a sounding board for some of the ideas that I had from a strategy point of view that I wanted to implement with Physio Space. He was somebody who I could always go to, who would be able to push me outside of my own kind of comfort zone in terms of goal setting and kind of the vision for where I wanted to go. And that was before the MSKPN actually existed. And so it's now been formalized, and that's something which I can highly recommend people can access, is that ability to kind of identify mentors with a wealth of experience who can help you grow. So that's the second point, is building relationships and maintaining them. The third thing is seek out opportunities to collaborate with other clinics. So, you know, nobody, as Andrew would say, nobody has got a monopoly on good ideas. That's one of his favorite sayings, I think. But that's really true, because actually, if you go out and you speak to other clinics, they're all sharing the same issues that you might be at that moment in time when you're growing. And so being able to talk with other people who are running clinics in the same way that you are is absolutely essential. And so now I have regular calls with clinics based in Durham, with clinics based in London, where we're able to just discuss, you know, everyday issues that we all experience and come up with different viewpoints and different solutions to how we can address them. So that's that third point, is seek out other opportunities to collaborate with other clinics, and don't be afraid to share knowledge, because it really makes a big difference. My fourth point would be take inspiration from industries that are not within health, or definitely not, you know, not within physio all the time. It's very important to do that, but to look a little bit further afield. And I've really benefited from looking at kind of tech industry and different organizations where they achieve a high functioning workplace by implementing different project management strategies. And so just thinking a little bit broader, not just zoning in on what we all do in physio and what we're used to, is really important, to then bring those ideas into your environment and make them kind of locally relevant. And then the final thing that I wanted to kind of get across is that you really do have to, early on in your journey of creating a private practice, nail down what your mission, your vision, and your values are. So if you're really clear with where you want to go as an organization, what you want to provide for your customers or your clients or your patients, and what value you want to add, you're going to have a much better chance of taking that company ethos and moving it forward successfully as you grow. I think that might be my 5 minutes.
Wonderful stuff. Thanks, Ed. So we're going to go on to Karen, who is here in voice, just not in vision. So take it away for us, Karen.
Good morning. My journey is slightly different from Ed's, and I'm going to try and put a slightly different perspective on it. So we started our clinic in 2001, and similarly did that with working evenings alongside a full-time job. Differently, myself and my business partner, we had a partnership as opposed to a limited company. And I do feel that I'm married to Leslie at times. If you are going into partnership, I would highly recommend having a business partner, but do it carefully. I've been extremely lucky. It means that I'm not doing it alone, which is fantastic. We're lucky that I'm the yin to her yang and vice versa, so we bring a different perspective. And you could say two minds are better than one, as long as you're not fighting, because we do know examples of other clinics where that has not worked. So you really must get on, and it means that it's not a lonely journey that you're going on. We also have to consider the fact that we were both women. And obviously at some point we wanted to get married and have babies, and we didn't plan it this way, but we did actually stagger that, because while you're off, somebody else actually needs to run the business. So it's that family work balance that is really difficult. But as with Ed said, I put that mileage right in at the beginning. So the amount of unpaid hours that go into this, I often say to people, this is dead easy to start a busy business. It's keeping it going that is the hard graft. So yes, if there's a family involved, you've got to think of how on earth you're going to do that, and hence why we expanded our team and moved forward. So we weren't the business, and I think that's important. If you're expanding, the two partners aren't the business. The business needs to be able to stand on its own 2 feet. You need to know your figures when you're expanding. That's really important. And it's making sure you spend the money on the things that you'll get return on, rather than the fluff. You know, nice seats are beautiful, but they don't pay the bills. So making sure that money is spent on the quality aspect. I remember a bit of advice from my dad when I first took on my first mortgage, saying make sure you can still pay it if interest rates go up to 10%. And I think that's the same with any sort of expansion, making sure you can pay the bills if the electricity goes up, for instance, which we're all facing. So don't spread yourself too thin. I can't agree with Ed more about a focus. Our mentor was a gentleman called James Butler, and he was always on about a clear focus. Know who you are and stick to your focus. And I think that's hugely important. If you are expanding, and again, from our mentor used to say, make sure you've got everybody on your bus that you want on your bus. You need to make sure you can be different and there can be differences between you, but you must all be heading in the same direction. So make sure you're full of people that you want to take with you. When we started, our rental was on a percentage, so we never were losing out to some degree. And however, at some point we knew that wouldn't work. So making sure that there's contingencies for change. But it was a big step for us to go into a rental that was fixed, because we knew we had fixed outgoings. And making sure if you're expanding, things like admin staff, rates, electric, water, and all that cost money. So physios cost money, but they at least give you return. Admin staff don't, so careful with that. You need to be able to adapt to your marketplace, and this is where MSKN, I wish they'd been about when we were starting back in the 2000s. And in discussion with both Ed and Rupert, we spoke about the fact that it feels like now I have got about 50 business partners as opposed to just Leslie. And it means you can kind of bat ideas off each other. So when it came, the private tendering came out in the notice, I wish MSK was about then for advice about what we do with things. When the oil turned, and luckily I found MSK-PN in COVID, which really helped me put a strategy together for the business. And since then, discussions in group chat will be about rental or buy, good aircon systems, different exercise software. Do you have an admin staff person, or do you actually go out with and get some sort of kind of telephone system to do your admin? And these are all great conversations to have with people that are more than happy to discuss it with you. And I think from a business perspective, that's really useful. Ed spoke about industry, turning to different industry. I turned to a different country. I took a lot of examples from Australia, and we really wanted to kind of build our business based on what they were doing. Collaborating with different people, that's fab to do because it challenges your biases. And I think that's really important for your biases to be challenged. Being stubborn and determined are what you need to kind of get going with business, but you need to make sure that doesn't get in your way as well. And I think that's about all from me, Jack.
Lovely stuff, Karen. That's good. I think so far Ed spoke about very positive things. You've brought in some slight negative things. You've yin and yang, lovely. I'm hoping Rupert's going to tie it all together with this section. So take it away for us, Rupert.
Lovely, thanks, Jack. Listen, great to hear those all those comments, because I concur with all of them. Hopefully, I can add a slightly different spin. So, a bit of context: Six pre-pandemic had about 120 people, 13 clinics, and we were heading towards £10 million turnover. We operate in central London, so the pandemic's been pretty tough. I wasn't there at the beginning. But I've certainly been through the growth stage, and we've actually now just sold the business as well. So I'll focus a little bit on that. I think the first, it's a rather sobering thought, is most private practices don't get sold. And I think that's because in many cases, people don't think about the exit from the moment they set out on their journey and end up a little disappointed at the end, or it's something they then start to think about when they really do need to sell, but they haven't built in that. So I guess the questions for me are, how do I get my business ready to sell? How do I get it to exit? Who's going to buy it, and why are they going to buy it? And what's going to make it attractive to those people who are hopefully potential buyers? I think the reality of where the industry is today is there are a lot of single clinic practices. And the reality of those is they're quite small scale, and the success of those practices is very reliant on the clinic owners, their reputation, their energy, their drive, their experience, and that sometimes makes them exiting a tricky thing. So there's that first sobering thought. The next one is really, for me, is around expansion, and making sure you surround yourself with some really good people, lead them to get on with stuff, and ensure they have the necessary, or you have the necessary kind of structures, processes, systems, plumbing. It feels like the kind of dull stuff, but actually it helps build the foundations of that business. And then as you grow, if you've got those in place, you're less likely to lose control, spiral out of control, not see that some areas are not working as well as they should, or causing you problems. So just make sure you put those building blocks in place. And those building blocks will change in terms of what you need to do as you grow and the bigger you get. Just like Karen, private practice business is all about, or comes down to numbers, I should say. It's not all about the numbers, but it comes down to the numbers. And the reality is most businesses fail, particularly in the early stages, not because they're not a good idea, they haven't got great people, but they just run out of cash. And they may even be profitable, but still run out of cash. And you just can't. I can't stress the importance of making sure that you know where your money's coming from, you know what's making you money, and you're collecting the money faster than you're paying it out. It's as simple as that. And I'd also encourage you just to have a couple of really good, simple, finance practices. So, do a cash flow, do some budgets, have a plan. Somebody once said to me in my early days, the lovely thing about not having a plan is that failure comes as a complete surprise, rather than being preceded by a period of anxiety and worry and angst. So have a plan before you set off. And then I think, my other lesson would be, this is a very personal service business and industry. It's all about people. It's all about the quality of the relationships your teams build with patients, with each other, and the way they work together. So invest in leadership, invest in your own leadership, invest in the leadership of those around you so that they can help run your business, manage your business for you. But both Ed and Karen talked about focus and clarity and mission and purpose. I'd probably add culture as well. I think one of the lessons for me was it's not perfect, but I think we've built a pretty strong culture at Six. And when times got really tough through the pandemic, that really held us together as an organisation. And with that comes some of that clarity about who we are, what we're doing, and why we exist, and our purpose. So build a strong culture within your teams and within your organisations. And then finally, I'm just going to drop in something that's probably a little bit more, or probably a little bit deliberately controversial. I'm going to say this as a former patient, by the way, because I got into this world by being a patient and having a really crap back for a long time and not getting sorted. And I would pose this point to you, that I think it's often more about the experience than it is about the clinical. So as a patient, I'm in your hands. You're the professional. You've got all the knowledge. You know what you're talking about. I can't judge that. I might judge it 6 months down the line when I'm still not better, but on day one, I can't judge it. But I can judge very easily how everything looks and feels. And we talk about, in Six, we talk about a vibe. It's how you show up. It's how you appear. It's how you're dressed. It's the warmth of the greeting. It's all those other things. It's how clean and tidy the place is. I can judge those as a patient. And I think to be successful, I think there should be obviously a focus on the clinical stuff. We've got to be good clinicians, but I think there should also be a focus on the experiential piece, because I think most other consumer-facing industries spend a lot more time and focus on those things, and I'm not always sure it gets quite the attention and time that it deserves in our world. So those were my lessons.
Lovely, thanks, Rupert. Ed, I wanted to come to you first, just on what Rupert was saying, because you're more at the beginning of this journey. I was just wondering if you would comment on, have you thought or built any of those processes that Rupert was just talking about? Maybe you don't never want to sell the clinic, but I just wondered if it's probably not a surprise to you because you've met Rupert before, but is any of that already in place for you, or is that something you need to start working on?
No, it absolutely is in place already. Yeah, and I'm fully aware actually of the importance of it being in place. So that, yeah, I think in terms of my own exit plan, I'm not completely clear exactly how that's going to play out. As you say, we're in the early days, but what I am aware of is anybody who's going to look at the organisation and be remotely interested in it and its potential, they're going to want to see that we've got our policies and procedures in place. We've got our employee engagement strategy in place. We've got our performance monitoring strategy in place, all of which we do have. And so I think, that maybe there's some of the procedure, the kind of the steps that Rupert was mentioning there that would be when you look at with a bit of a microscope on how that organisation is set up. As I mentioned, mission, vision, values, having all of that, having an employee handbook, which is all laid out so that a new starter can get straight up to speed with everything that they do, so that they can start performing and generating revenue. Those sort of steps, like they are in place. They can be improved, but I'm aware of how important they are for prospective, acquirers of any business, I guess, to be able to look and see.
I think everybody who has a small business or any business dreams of the day where someone knocks on the door and says, I want to buy it. I don't know if that's quite the reality, is it? Karen, I was wondering if you would comment. I felt like it wasn't in direct opposition, but Rupert was talking about vibe and environment and the feeling of practices being as polished or online as possible, so that patients feel like they are getting the best service that they can. I feel like that's rubbed slightly up against what you said with regards to finances, in regards to you mentioned chairs specifically, which is probably a nice example. Like it's not a great vibe if you come in and you have to sit on a terrible plastic chair, but equally, if you have to spend a few grand on a really comfy chair, not many small businesses have got that spare cash. Have you got any comments on finding a middle ground there, or do you want to completely disagree with Rupert? That would be fun.
No. I think cash flow is also something that Rupert mentioned, and the importance of cash flow. And I think when you're spending any money, you need to make sure there's the money that's coming in to pay for that. And if there's a seat, and that it needs to look nice, it can't look like something that's fallen off the back of a lorry, but it can look nice and cost £50 as opposed to be fluffy and cost £300. And I think that's important. I think cleanliness is really important, and our practice manager at one of our clinics, she's almost like a matron, and I think that matronly feel is important. There can't be stuff lying around. It's all got to be put away, and everything has got to be clean. So I think that's really important, and I think it's making sure that you make cost-effective decisions to get that experience and that vibe, as opposed to making it look very fluffy and it putting you out of business. And there's a middle ground to get there. So sorry if I'm sitting in the fence and not causing an argument here, Jack, but this is the business. This is the things, the discussions I have with my business partner all the time. I'm the spender, and she's got the purse strings, and we work together to try and get that middle ground, because it's really important that you don't that you keep that cash flow.
No, I didn't think I was going to manage to cause an argument between you. Rupert, I wondered if you'd just comment again on that point, because I think it's a really interesting one. I know what I'm like, and it's, I like expensive furniture and those kind of things, not that I can afford them, but I would want to put the nice things in the clinic. Is there a little bit of a difference? You mentioned most of your clinics are in central London. Karen's obviously in a slightly less densely populated area in Scotland. Do you think it matters what else is around? If you're competing against high spec clinics, do you think you might have to push more towards that? Or and therefore it's less of a worry if there aren't so many of those types of clinics around, or even, let's say we went outside of physiotherapy for a minute, there's osteopath clinics or chiropractic clinics or whatever that are high spec or have been there a long time and can afford those things? Or do you feel like there's more of a general environmental vibe you can create, which is personalized to you, where you could potentially, you know, take it a different route entirely, if that makes sense as a question?
Yeah, I think so. Let me just say, I don't disagree with Karen, by the way. There obviously is a balance in there, and you do have to have the money to pay for it. So I think I've learned in life that most things are about a balance. We go too far one way, it's a bit bananas. We go too far the other way, it's a bit bananas. And we're often swinging back in between. And if we could just find this kind of equilibrium in the middle, that's the right place to be. I don't think it's driven by the fact that, I don't think what we've done is driven by the fact there are lots of other smart clinics, or you know, people have spent a lot of money on the interiors. There is an element of that, because to some degree, you know, as a patient, as a client, as a customer, you know, if I've been somewhere else and that's what I've seen and that's the bar, it's hard. You know, if you end up below that, then people are kind of immediately going to judge you. So there's an element of that, but I still think that first impression is really important. And like Karen, you know, that cleanliness piece isn't hard to do. That doesn't cost you a lot of money. It may need a lick of paint occasionally, but a lot of the time it's just making sure it looks tidy, it looks neat, and it is actually clean. You know, the floor is swept, there's not stuff underneath the couch, there's just not muck in the corner, the bin's being emptied, it's not overflowing. So I think you can do it at a level. I still think the vast majority of private practice I've walked into, and I talk about that as a patient as well, pre-6, there could and should have been more investment in just the look and the feel. And there were too many nasty, crappy plastic chairs sat in the corner, kind of, you know, that wobbled a bit or whatever. And that immediately just, I think, takes away from that impression of what's the service going to be like. So,
perfect.
Does that answer your question?
I think it does, yeah. I was wondering if Ed will come in on that as well, being sort of slightly nearer the start of the journey. He hasn't run off to find the crappy plastic chair to chuck it in the bin or anything. But I was wondering, Ed, do you feel like you want better stuff and can't afford it? Or do you feel like you've struck that balance where you want it to be yet? Where are you at in that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think, be realistic with what we've done up until this point. We've kind of gone through a few phases. We had our kind of ground floor of our premises done as the first thing, and that was done to a standard to get up and running. It's now looks a little bit dated, and so we will be addressing that at some point. We then, our phase 2 was our studio, where we do our Pilates and our yoga and reformer Pilates. That's like a kind of a step up, I guess. And now we've got a second site that we're going to be opening, like a second full site that will be opening in September, which is going to be another level again. And I guess I feel like with what we've done, we've gone for a little bit more of a kind of a small clinic boutique feel, which has led to us probably going a little bit more along the higher spec line, but on a smaller scale, because I'm very, very much focused on customer or client or patient experience as probably one of our main things. Like Rupert said, I think that is probably the most important thing. Clinically, it's a non-negotiable. We have to be there. So I guess, yeah, sort of to answer your question, because of the experience is so important, we probably have gone for that slightly more. Yeah, the designs for the new place look fantastic, and it should be a really nice environment to work in, to do your Pilates, to do your strength and conditioning, to do your physio. So yeah, probably stirred up a little bit there and gone for the higher end of the spec.
Well, no, I think there's room for all, isn't there, at this? As long as you keep what Rupert said in mind, I think is key.
Absolutely.
Karen, Ed just mentioned about opening a second site. I was just wondering, you talked about, in your 5 minutes, you talked about capacity and making sure being busy and spreading workload between yourself and your business partner. Have you had, ignoring COVID, because obviously that's not fair, but were there times where that balance was wrong, and have you got any advice on mitigating those issues or fixing them, if that makes sense?
Yes, yes, it has. I mean, I think we've got to the stage now that we're like an old married couple, and I think we joke that we get on better. with each other than we do our husbands. But that has, like any relationship, that takes a lot of time and effort to build. Leslie, she had her children first, and that when she had her children, that was left with me for the business, to kind of hold that up. And then likewise when I had hers. It's one of those where you always feel that you're the one that's carrying it, you know what I mean? And at certain points, you know, you're the glass that's kind of half full. Oh, I'm doing this and she's not doing that. Whereas actually in reality, it's very equal. My advice would be, don't let things build. Sit down and chat them through. We managed to go traveling together for 3 months before, you know, while we were students. So we knew we got on, we knew we could work together to problem solve. And you need to be sure that it can work. And we're equal partners as well, which I think helps that as well. But just the discussion. And we've always sorted things out with being open, honest, and sitting around a table and discussing.
Excellent. Yeah, great. Rupert, I wondered if you'd comment a little bit. Again, Ed's opening this. I'm going to use Ed as the example. Opening this second site, with 6, you obviously have multiple sites. I was just wondering if we gave the example where Ed's new site opens and they're struggling to get customers into the front door there for whatever reason. Have you had similar experiences with 6 where some clinics have had lower volume and others have had almost too higher volume? And have you got any strategies for people when they're opening new sites to try and even the volume out across those sites?
Sorry, I just lost you at the end there. I think it might have been my connection, but I think I got the gist of that. So yes, I mean, the reality is, even when we had 13 clinics, there was always, every year, there was, you know, 2 or 3 that were doing phenomenally well. We had a plan for them, a budget, they would outperform. There was the rest who were kind of broadly where you thought they would end up, and there were always 1 or 2 that were struggling for whatever reason. Very often that was around just people. If I'm honest, we didn't fortunately ever have a clinic that was in the wrong location, was struggling because it was just, you know, we put it in the wrong place, we didn't put enough into it, we fitted it out poorly, or some other element of something that was wrong. So it usually just came down to people in the team, often leadership. I think that the lesson for me was being able to identify that very quickly and very early. So having those key performance metrics, those measures, those financial metrics that could show you that this wasn't on track, having a plan and then seeing it track poorly against it, and being able to jump in early on and say something's not quite right here, we're not sure what. Because I think the trick is, as you open more, I'm sure Ed will be able to spend a lot of time between 2 sites. I'm assuming they're geographically a little bit apart, but I don't know. But let's assume they are, because that's typically what happens. You do one here, you do one here, you do one here. And I think when you get to kind of 3, 4, you'll probably still be able to rush around and have an input and make sure you've got your hands around it. And then when you get beyond this magic 3, 4, I think it becomes really tricky. If there's a couple of you, that's easier because you can obviously split a bit of time between them. But I think that tipping point is 4 or 5 and 6. And then I think you've got to have those structures in place, because otherwise you just won't know what's happening day to day in a new location, and you won't be able to address those issues quickly unless you've got those metrics in place that says, alarm bell, I should be here and I'm not, something's going wrong here. And I'm now going to go and spend time there, but I don't need to spend time over here and here because these 2 look like they're doing okay, teams are happy, performance is where I expect it to be, and it's all tracking well.
Great, perfect. On the volume side of things, Karen, I wonder if I could come to you on this next bit. I've got a few bits in the chat and a couple of questions about insurance work, and sometimes a bit of a iffy question talking about insurers, especially with physiotherapy. I wonder if you would comment on, obviously one of the benefits of insurers is you're getting referrals in, but obviously one of the cons is often they don't pay as much as self-pay patients. I wonder if you just comment on the balance of insurance versus self-pay, and whether you've been able to strike a good balance there, or whether you've had any problems with that in the past, and what you kind of do with insurers.
Oh, this is a great question. Insurance, I would say my key advice with insurance is to make sure that you negotiate as good a contract as you can from the off. And if the value that they're giving to your service, you need to weigh up how much you need that business versus the amount that's off that self-pay rate. So for us, it's about getting as much self-pay in as we can and kind of reducing that insurance volume as much as we can. The key bits that it's important, it's not just cost, it's then when they'll pay. So sometimes they'll pay, weekly, you can invoice them, and it's how you invoice them, because that's really, you want that to be as cost effective as possible. But some won't actually pay until the end of treatment. And obviously, if you've got to wait till the end of treatment, then that's money that's in their pocket versus yours. And that's all about, that's that cash flow consideration again. It's also their payment term. So for some of them, they'll say it's 3 months. So if you can only invoice them at the end of treatment, and then that's a 3 month until they need to pay, that can be them paying for treatment that was 6 months ago. You've still to pay your staff. So as much as the business is good business in, it's only good business if your cash flow can support that. So these are the important considerations. We look at a 30-day term is the least that we will go with now, because we don't want to have the money in their bank. And when you look at it, that uninvoiced charges, as we call it, that can sit for us a good couple of £1,000, which is really important. You keep that as low as possible. There's different types of insurance companies. You've obviously got your AXAs, your Bupas, your Avivas, and all them. And there's also the ones that have the intermediaries, where you have to do all your report writing. And with that, it's then looking at the time element. So we all should be accountable for what we do. Quality is really important in what we deliver. But these reports can take a lot of time, and there can be kickback on them for the amount of treatments that you're able to then do. So that's an important consideration, is the reports. I think if we want to change this industry, we need to be able to prove quality. And they are driving us down on price. It's a race to the bottom, whereas it used to be quite fluffy back in the day with insurance companies, and it's far from that now. It is a race for the bottom on price, and there's always people that undercut you. So I think we've got to be able to prove our quality, have an easy way to prove quality. And that's why I'm part of MSKPN, because there's a real push to do that. And I think if we don't do that, then there is a real issue with these insurance companies going forward. So I think we all need to work together to be able to prove quality, to change the marketplace, because it's in their favour at the moment, not ours.
I agree. I think I probably know the answer to this question if I ask it to you, Ed, but do you follow a similar sort of model as Karen, or are you no insurance? Or I know some clinics that just flat out won't take any insurance, for example.
No, we do take insurance patients, but predominantly, I'd probably say 90% of our clients and customers are self-funding. 10% roughly being the rest of the insurance patients through Bupa, AXA, Aviva, WPA, and we only stick with those insurers, which makes our life a little bit easier. But yeah, that's roughly the percentage split, and that just probably reflects the client base that we see in Cardiff, I guess.
Rupert, with 6, is there any difference because of the number of clinics and the inherent efficiencies of having more staff, more admin, more clinics? Are you able to accept longer payment terms, more sort of lower prices, for want of a better phrase, or do you still stick like Ed and Karen are saying and be like, no, this is our payment floor, if that makes sense?
There's an element that volume helps, and I'm also in central London, so with the and we are still in high footfall office-based locations, which pre-pandemic was a genius strategy, post-pandemic not so genius. But anyway, we're still there, and so we see a lot of insured patients. When I first joined 6, it was over 70% insured, and that was definitely too much. It's around the 50% mark now. It's shifted a bit as working patterns have shifted as well. Ideally, I'd like it to be lower. I mean, in a funny way, the insurance piece and the NHS do distort the marketplace, because in an ideal world, the playing field would be level. Ed would charge a certain amount for his services. I would, Karen would, and if people genuinely had the choice, it would then just depend on how good we were at what we were doing. And if I had a practice around the corner from Ed's, if he was doing a better job, frankly, he deserves to get more clients, more patients. He would be more successful. And I'm afraid the insurance piece does distort that marketplace. I think Karen's absolutely right. You know, there's a margin piece that says I can do this bit of work, but actually if I don't get paid for it for 6 months, actually that's just killing my business very slowly, strangling it. I mean, you're effectively funding the insurers, which can't be right when you're this size and they're this size. My personal view is, you know, we've got to get some change there, and we're actively engaging. So I had a call actually with Rupert this week, with Natasha Price, who's a director at MSKPN2, just to talk about what's going to happen when that renewal comes up again. You know, how do we change what is happening today, where there is a race to the bottom in terms of pricing? Because at the moment, the insurers, if you look at it from their perspective, they can't differentiate between what Ed's doing, what I'm doing, what Karen's doing, is the reality. We'll all say we're doing a great job. We've got some great clinicians. We get fabulous outcomes. But even if we are collecting some data, has been in the past a different set of data. So we're comparing an apple with a banana with a pear, which doesn't make any sense. And the insurers will tell you they see a huge amount of variation from, you know, this point to this point. And I've worked in other industries where that variation just wouldn't be tolerated, couldn't be tolerated, just wouldn't work. So I do think we need to, you know, bring it to here, and we need to prove that what we do actually works. And think about it in a wider context as well, not just the output of what we're doing from a physio point of view, but actually, you know, the work we could do to prevent some other costs and ongoing costs like surgery, you know, into elective surgery, et cetera, where actually we could probably prove that we can save some money by not allowing patients to end up down at that point in the first place. So I think there's a lot of work to be doing. It's going to be a long journey because it is about change. It's about encouraging them to change. But I'm certainly hearing that there's a willingness and there's a recognition from their point of view that where we're all headed doesn't really work for them either, because lots of good practices are saying, I don't think I can sustain this any longer given the pricing. So.
Very interesting. Hopefully that does all change. Let's fingers crossed on that. Ed, I just want to come to you. There's a question in the Q&A about independence really when starting out. You mentioned, you know, Karen did as well, but we're working in the NHS, started to drop some of your hours and work privately. How important is it to early on start building your own brand? The example in the question is about own colours, own branding on things. The question is about, you know, they don't know whether to lease or rent from a practice or a gym or have their own entrance. Obviously that's a bigger step, but how much do you think that's important very early when you're first start building that sort of almost brand awareness?
Yeah, I think it's really important. That ties back into what I was saying earlier about being clear with the mission, vision, values. I think your brand has to kind of complement all of those things, and I think it's really important to have a really clear brand identity with things like colors and the same palette that you're consistent with across digital platforms, whether it's social media, whether it's web, whether that's consistent over then into your print and the content that you put out in clinic as well or physically. So I think that really is important. That was a big thing for me at the very start. I just sort of stuck with it, you know, again, simple things, but a logo. We kept the colors consistent across all of those different areas, and that stuck with us up until now. And we're yet to kind of rebrand that, although it may be time, but we'll get to that at some point. So yeah, I guess really important to prioritize it, and I think the consistency is key really with branding. And moving on to the bit about whether or not to lease or to kind of where you go down that route. I mean, it's all dependent on your individual situation at that time. I think you just got to go back to the financials and as Rupert and Karen have been saying, get them nailed down from a really early stage, so that decision has to be based on how busy you're going to be, and then how much you're going to be able to afford from an overheads point of view. So sadly, not one kind of quick fix or quick simple answer with that, but it's really a bit more person dependent or group dependent, because it's not about going in as an individual. I've got some friends who have gone in, and there's 3 of them, and they're in partnership together, and they're spreading that load, and that means that again, risk is diversified a little bit, and spread across more than just you as an individual. So yeah, I hope that answers the question, but sorry, there's not really a quick fix with that.
No worries. We have come to the end of the webinar, and really interesting. I feel like I could sit here and ask you 3 questions all day about clinics and what to do with them, and poke at some of the things that you've said. I think everybody needs to definitely check out MSKPN, as Rupert said. That collective sort of bargaining power and just the support from what I've seen just seems really excellent. So do head to MSKPN and find out what they're all about. Thank you very much to you 3 for answering the questions, giving such eloquent descriptions of lessons that you've learned along the way, and hopefully everybody enjoys the rest of their day. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
No worries. And hopefully everybody will enjoy the rest of the webinars for the day. Keep checking them out, and yeah, head to MSKPN and find out what they're all about. But thank you for tuning in, and bye for now.